Hello fellow cinephiles, 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'll be looking at a film I've really loved and enjoyed for so long and have found a new appreciation for the film since recently viewing it. Today I'm reviewing Tank Girl. This film came out in 1995 and was directed by Rachel Talia, who was mostly known for Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Dead. That came out in the 80s and had done a little bits and pieces, but this was her first foray into a real independent, unique directing opportunity and doing a film she really wanted to do. Very, very cult classic film that didn't do well at the box office, but it is a cult classic for a reason, and I love that aspect to it. Tank Girl was originally created in the 80s by a British artist, Jamie Hewlett, who would later team up with Blur singer Damon Albarn to form the visual band Gorillaz, which is kind of interesting as well. But you can really tell, especially with Gorillaz as well, he has a unique take on things, and the way he designs and creates Tank Girl, the way it looks in the comics is really cool and interesting. And he has some really fascinating ideas, and he's dealing with a post-apocalyptic world where the world's ended and certain things are important than others, and I kind of like what he designed with this film. I saw this interview with Rachel Talia, and she talked about how her stepdaughter brought home this comic and she read through it and really loved it and really wanted to make it into a film. That it was all black and white and she felt she could do something with it, so she ultimately bought the rights to film. But it would take her quite a while to get the movie going or made, as a lot of people didn't quite understand what she wanted to do with the film. It has a great cast. Laurie Petty is fantastic as Tank Girl. She's comical and strange and unique and quirky. She really owns the role. It's definitely a role that suits her, and she brings in a lot to it and injects so much in the role that I love her performance. It kind of reminds me a lot of what Margot Robbie did with Harley Quinn years later, and I feel like they are similar characters, a little crazy and odd and quirky. Obviously Harley Quinn's much more extreme than Tank Girl, but they just sort of, the way they interact in the world and look at the world is kind of very similar, and I like that aspect to it. I think Malcolm McDowell's really great as the villain in the film. He does what he does well, and it suits the movie in a lot of ways, and he is a standout, and there is something that happens to him, a procedure he has to go through that completely changes him, which I kind of like what they do. It's a little goofy and silly, but I love what they do with his character. He's so unhinged, and to have these two really crazy characters against each other is really fun to watch on screen as well. Australia's own Naomi Watts was in the film as well, because sort of this sort of pilot mechanic character, and he's ultimately Tank Girl's best friend, and I kind of like her in the film. They work really well together. Ice-T's in it. Doug Jones is even in it. There are these characters that are sort of half human, half kangaroo, and Doug Jones plays one of them, brings them to life, so does Ice-T, and the prosthetic work is really great, and I'm pretty sure most of it was Stan Winston. They're called Rippers, and they're sort of these hybrid characters, and they're really cool. In the comics they're very different, and Tank Girl has a relationship with one, which they touch on in this, but it's just kind of interesting to see how they look and move and feel, and I kind of like that. I really love the world we're introduced. It is sort of a post-apocalyptic world, so there's a lot of it in the desert. Water is very important, to the point that I have these machines that if someone dies, they can just stick this machine in it and it'll suck out all the water. And it's a very important part to the story, and this company's trying to control how they disperse it and control the water itself, which is kind of interesting. Even though the film is set in a futuristic world, it is pure 90s. It encapsulates 90s so much, like Empire Records does. In the look of the character, the world we're introduced to, the music, the way it's shot, the clothing, everything just feels of that time and period. The goofiness and silliness that this film has in certain aspects, but is kind of great. It's a very likable film, mainly because of the performance by Laurie Petty, who's really great and wonderful in the lead role as Tank Girl. She just feels like a character you can love and like and get behind. The film was made for $25 million, but only made $6 million back, so it was a big box office flop. But it has become a cult classic, probably one of the most popular cult classic films to come out that didn't do well at the time, but is really popular now. They've even released the Blu-ray of it that I had to pick up, of course. And there are many versions of the film up there as well, and I just love what they do with the movie. And it is a unique cinema experience. There's live action, there's animation, there's all these things that are in it that are really cool. Everything's very practical, which I like. There are visual effects in it, but they're very minimal and they serve a purpose in the film. There are sequences, like I mentioned, that are animated where we see Tank Girl driving a tank and the craziness she goes through. And I don't know whether that was sort of Rachel trying to throw as much into this as she could from the comics, or whether that wasn't able to do that as practically as she wanted to because of lack of money. But either way, it works. Not a lot of, you can't say that about a lot of movies like this where they throw different types of styles into the movie that really work overall, but this definitely does, and I love what they do with the movie itself. I love the journey of the Tank Girl character, the interesting and colourful characters she meets along the way. She gets arrested at one point, ends up in this sort of weird jail thing where they have to do all these sort of manual labour things, and they can't shower with water, so it's like a powder, but it kind of is interesting. She makes that sort of interesting. There's so much of her in this film that she just is quite crazy and wild and quirky, and gives, like I said, Harley Quinn a run for her money, but in a different way. And I'm just a huge fan of this. I love this movie so much. It's just so great, of a very interesting time, interesting ideas, a great sort of entertaining film that has a bit of everything in it. And not everyone's going to love it, but that's okay. That's why we have movies like this. This is why we have different opinions of what makes a film great, but this is definitely one of mine. Tank Girl is the best way to describe her, is there's a coolness to her, sort of punky character. That's definitely reminiscent of the 90s, when you had a lot of these sort of punky characters fighting against the system or corporations and taking a stand when things aren't really looked at and people aren't treated properly. And this is definitely what she does. There's nothing you can throw at her she can't deal with. She accepts certain circumstances. She just goes with what happens. She doesn't question too much. It's just this journey of this character that's unstoppable in many ways, because she just won't heed to what they expect of her, and she won't kneel down before anybody. She will stand tall and take anybody on, and is very zen in that way. She just sort of flows and goes with the flow, and I still find it so amazing that Stan Winston did so many prosthetics and robotic, creatures and stuff through the 90s. He was definitely a man who knew what he was doing. I just wish the Stan Winston company now would be much more practical than they actually are, because I just feel that there is great opportunity to harness the things he was doing. I know a lot of times they want to do things digitally because it's easier, but there's just something about a practical thing being there and how the actors can react to that and play to it, and I think that's very important. The thing about when this film was being cast, that 2 of the Spice Girls auditioned for Tank Girl. I don't know how true that is, but that's kind of an interesting thing, and I think that's something that the production and the producers and stuff leaned into to give an interesting little tidbit, but also showing how vast their audition process was going to be, as most of the auditions took place in London. There is footage of Victoria Beckham, Jerry Halliwell standing there, and they just sort of took that, and I think that might have intrigued a lot of people to have these 2 super pop stars together at an audition for a film that's unique. So the studio hired Emily Lloyd, but Rachel fired her because it just didn't work. They weren't working together, and there was just something that wasn't quite right about the casting, so she decided to fire her, and then started to scan to find some more actors to play the role. Laurie Petty was Rachel's idea to cast as Tank Girl, but there were so many other choices that the studio wanted, but I'm glad they went with Laurie Petty because she's just fantastic in the movie. She, from doing this to Point Break and a variety of others, this is definitely one of her best films and her best performances. And there is talk of redoing this film. Margot Robbie was involved in it. Whether it's actually going to come to fruition or not, I don't know. But in my opinion, I don't think Margot Robbie should play the lead if she's going to do it, mainly because she'd just do a Harley Quinn and it would feel too much like Harley Quinn. I think someone like Samara Weaving would be a wonderful choice to be in a film like this, and wonderful to play Tank Girl, a fellow Australian, but also someone that is proving herself very versatile and could play a variety of different roles and characters and has fun in it. And I think she would be a great choice if they ever did it. And apparently Bjork was meant to be in it. That would have been interesting as well. I think she's a solid actress, but she ultimately dropped out. It just would have been kind of cool to see her in this. It would have been definitely a film right up her alley. They only shot this film in 16 weeks. And in a variety of locations. That's a very short period to shoot something like this. Usually productions these days are six months to a year. And that's kind of your usual, but to have something like this is much shorter is kind of interesting. Apparently in the comics, the Ripper characters are considerably more kangaroo-like, but Talia wanted to have actual actors rather than stuntmen in suits playing the characters. And like I mentioned, she cast a couple of interesting. Ice-T was great, and Doug Jones, who's fantastic in these sort of prosthetic prosthetic covered roles that he gets to play, and he's great in this. And this film wouldn't be complete without Tank Girl driving a tank. And there's this really interesting tank that she has, and it sort of has a mind of its own in a lot of ways, which is unique and interesting. It comes to life on screen. Apparently it was a modified M5A1 Stuart. I'm not quite familiar with the tanks, but I gather that's a good one. Well, you've got to have a tank. You might as well have a good one that works with the story and is very similar to the one that you see in the comics. Why not? Apparently, one of the Rippers they made a naked suit that had male anatomy and was going to be put in the film, and at the studio's push, these scenes were cut. Bit extreme, I guess, to have a naked sort of kangaroo human hybrid, but it sort of is very like the comics. Not that we see full frontal nudity in the comics, but it does touch on particular aspects of that would have worked for the film, especially fans of the comic. And obviously there's recuts and bits and pieces of the film, and sort of Rachel Talia always talked about how the meddling of the studio produced, different edits of the film, the cuts, really made this film suffer in a lot of ways, which was unfortunate because she had such a clear vision. It was based upon a very unique and interesting source material and comic book, and I just feel like if they just let her, yet again, like I mentioned with Johnny Mnemonic, if they just let the filmmakers make the film they wanted to make, it could have been so much better. For those who listen to Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't always, it only got a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes. And look, I don't know why we base every film upon what this particular website thinks, but we do, and this was very low, and you can see why it wasn't as successful as it could have been. So the website consensus says, while unconventional, Tank Girl isn't particularly clever or engaging, and none of the script's copious one-liners have any real zing. I disagree with that. I think Laurie Petty delivers some really wonderful one-liners. It's fantastic and her capability of improvising, but also being effective with the dialogue is great. And my favourite review of all time, Roger Ebert, he gave the film two out of 4 stars. He concluded it, while praising the film's ambition, he concluded it was hard to care about it for as long as its manic energy wore him down. And through the years, there has been many more positive reviews of this movie. And like I mentioned, I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's a really great film, and it's definitely one of my favourite films out of the 90s. I highly recommend this film if you like something different, creative and interesting, based on a well-known comic book and source material. And a film, if you just want to have fun, this is what this film is. Any fan of the 90s, any fan of sort of post-apocalyptic worlds or sort of comical, quirky action movies, you need to check this out. Laurie Petty is fantastic in the role. She is wonderful. I love her performance here. This is probably my favourite performance by her. She was able to be quirky and strange and odd and push things to the limit, and that made the film so fun and engaging. It's highly entertaining and fun, and it's filled with really interesting concepts and ideas, and the characters are great, as well as the world building that it happens within the movie is fantastic as well. Malcolm McDowell's a great villain. There's just so much to like here, a lot more to like here than we would usually see in other films, and I'm a big fan of it, and I do recommend it. It is a wonderful movie. There's many scenes that stand out from me as well. When we first meet Tank Girl, she's riding this sort of creature. I'm not 100% sure what creature it is, if I don't remember correctly. And we see the house and the world she's involved in. She gets taken from that. We see the villain and his world and what transpires in the whole corporation thing. There are cool moments with it, like when even when she's being taken captive, she still keeps up that zany, quirky attitude. She doesn't let anything get to her. The whole fight sequence at the end with the tanks and the rippers is really cool as well. Has a great soundtrack. I just overall think it's a great film and definitely one of the best films of the 90s. I'd give Tank Girl 4 out of 5. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Very fun movie. And it's a film I go back to from time to time because I think it's wonderful and I like the world we're introduced, and I want to go there and experience that world through the eyes of our heroine, Tank Girl. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom, follow my letterbox and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movie.